Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, and I need to unburden my soul a little bit. I got a comment that really kind of disturbed me. I went back and forth with the guy a little bit. He was talking about my contention that the greatest English composer was Sir Arthur Sullivan. And I mean that. It was Sir Arthur Sullivan. And I think he was aghast, and he said, well, what about Juan Williams? He's sung in every Anglican church. He wrote dozens of hymns. They're so much more popular. I'm not going to get into the question of whether religious music is better than secular music, or who cares if something is sung in Anglican churches. Not me, but that's not the point. The point is quality. The point is, what is greatness? And more to the point, I can't answer those questions, by the way. The real point that I think we can talk about meaningfully is why? Why is it so appalling to people, especially miserable, snotty, sanctimonious classical music people, that humor is evil? That music which is humorous cannot aspire to the higher qualities in life. Now, I personally believe, and I am very serious about this, that there is no higher artistic calling than the ability to make people laugh. I truly believe that. I think tragedy is easy. Tragedy is cheap. Tragedy in music is the laziest thing you can do. All you need to do is find a minor key and stick with it. You just hang on to it for as long as you can. And the longer you hang on to it, the more dismal and tragic the music is going to sound. It's really very, very straightforward. Sad music is the easiest thing to do. Happy music, which is not superficial, which makes people laugh, which hits you in your gut and gives you a real belly laugh, that's hard. Why is it hard? Because it requires more musical elements than sad music does. Like I said, sad music just requires that you be dismal and make it last. But happy music, well, that requires contrast, because happiness by itself is well, it's as meaningless as sadness, except it's less interesting. In order for music to be funny, never mind happy, funny, you need to have timing, an unbelievable sense of comic timing, which is a gift. Most composers don't have it at all. And you need to be able to achieve funniness in contrast to something, because the thing that's going to make you laugh is going to be the opposition of elements. So that means juggling more musical qualities and timbres and colors and harmonies and textures than just being dismal. I mean, for me, it's just an issue of fact. It's an issue of how able you need to be as a composer if you're a comedian as opposed to a tragedian. And one of the great comedians in music, without any doubt in my mind, was Arthur Sullivan. And the operettas he wrote, the operas, if you want to call them, they're operas really. I mean, opera, it's just a way of diminishing what he did, but they're operas. And as far as I'm concerned, that he wrote with Gilbert, contain some of the most perfect marriage of text and music in the history of world composition. I mean, who was better? No one. It's that simple. So if you're absolutely the best at what you do, you're going to be, I think, acknowledged as great. Then the issue becomes, how do we value what you do? Now, even in Sullivan's own day, Queen Victoria, that, laugh riot of a woman, was always saying to him, oh, Sir Arthur, I didn't knight you so that you could write those silly little comic operettas. You should do something serious with your God-given gifts. So he did, and it was boring. Well, not entirely. Ivanhoe is not a terrible opera, his big serious opera. And those choral things that English composers in the 19th century had to write, like the Golden Legend and all that stuff, they're not bad. He was a really gifted composer. He wrote great tunes. His orchestration was fabulous. And he had a great sense of timing. So all of the sanctimonious texts and religious folderol that he was forced to do, none of that could turn him into a bad composer. It wasn't going to happen. But when he had great words to set, and there are no words greater than Gilbert's, in all of opera, these are some of the best librettos anyone was ever given to set, because Gilbert was as much of a genius at the English language as Sullivan was as a composer. And for those of you who are not English speakers, that's harder to grasp. And I understand that. Because, I'm not a master of Italian poetry and I'm not a master of German poetry. And so there may be phenomenal librettos in those languages that I simply wouldn't appreciate because I don't appreciate the language in the same way. But Gilbert was fabulous. And I don't really think you need to be a native English speaker if you actually read the words to get the humor in what he wrote. I mean, I can never get past There's Beauty in the Bellow of the Blast from the Mikado, where Katishaw and the Lord High Executioner are singing a duet. And at one point he says, "Are you old enough to marry, don't you think? Why not wait until you're 80 in the shade? There's a fascination frantic and a ruin that's romantic. Do you think that you're sufficiently decayed?" And then she, of course, responds, "To the subject that you mention, I have given some attention, and I think I am sufficiently decayed." I mean, it's hilarious. It's hysterical. The words are great, and the better you pay attention to them, the funnier they get. My goodness, they're marvelous. I mean, I had the luck because when I was in high school, we did a Gilbert and Sullivan every year. So I was in a bunch of them and sang in a bunch of them. And I mean, they're so much fun. The patter songs. Oh my goodness, Major General Stanley. I am the very model of a modern Major General of information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. I know the kings of England, and I quote the facts historical, from Marathon to Waterloo in order categorical. I am very well acquainted too with matters mathematical. I understand equations both as simple and quadratical. About binomial theorems, I am teeming with a lot of news, with many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse. I'm very good at integral and differential calculus. I know the scientific names of beings and animalculus. I mean, come on! It's phenomenal. And it's not just the words that are great. The music that matches them is equally great. It illuminates them at every point. And it's funny music. And the more you know your Italian opera of the day, the funnier this whole thing gets. I mean, it really is. It really is hysterically funny. The opening tune from the Pirates of Penzance, or it became the song With Cat-Like Tread. With cat-like tread, upon our way we steal, in silence dread, our cautious way we feel. And then, of course, it comes, with cat-like tread, bang, upon our way we steal, bang. Well, what is that tune? That tune is an amalgam of two moments from Verdis Aida. First, there's the triumphal scene. That's where the bangs come from, right? Gloria Egite. Bang! Da, 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 da. Bang! Right? That's Verdi. But the actual tune, da-dum, bum, ba, da-dum, 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 that's the king or the high priest number from the first scene of Act 1 in the temple. Da 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 da. That's Act 1, and Sullivan just sort of smushed them together, and it's incredible. Or when he does the takeoff of like the mad scene from Lucia de Lammermoor for Mabel, and I mean, it's just amazing. It's so great, and he was a genius. He was a genius, and a funny genius. But of course, it is just beyond horror for most people to say that your national composer, the one who represents the nation, who represents the body politic, is a comedian. Nobody wants to acknowledge that. And okay, I guess I get it. That's why they adopted Handel in England. I mean, Handel was also extremely funny. I mean, he really could be, but they were able to monumentalize him and take him very, very seriously. Remember, for 200 years, it was forbidden to acknowledge the fact that Handel wrote an opera. He was the composer of Messiah, not the composer of Circe, and which is very funny. And or Julius Caesar, because it was the religious side of him, his piety, his sincerity, his devoutness. That's what you want in a national composer. But I don't care about national composers. I really don't. I don't care how well he represents the nation. I care about how well a composer writes music. And there was nobody at all in 19th century England or afterwards who wrote what he wrote as well as he wrote it. Now, there may be people who you would say, well, they were just as good. Elgar was just as good. Vaughan Williams was just as good. Britten wrote wonderful operas. All of that's true. All of that is true. I completely accept that fact. And it's also true that English music didn't really take off until after the turn of the 20th century, when you had a wonderful list of concatenation of composers who were very, very gifted and who wrote splendid, splendid music. But Arthur Sullivan was never equaled. And I stand by that. And just, as a sample of some of his gifts, I have here this little disc of overtures. And it's not just, by the way, quality. Wait a minute. It's not just quality. It's also quantity. Think of somebody else who wrote more than a dozen comic operas that are almost perfect. I mean, really perfect. A composer who could establish the atmosphere of a tune, of a setting instantly, the way Sullivan could. Really, I mean, he was just so gifted. Let's take a few examples, right? I have here Sullivan's overtures with Andrew Penny on Naxos. Let's just do a couple. First, the opening of let's do not the Pirates of Penzance. Let's do Pinafore. I mean, it's a rollicking sea chanty. You don't need to know what the story is about to know from the first tune that you hear in the overture that it's about sailors sailing the sea. It's that salty, wonderful, yo ho ho and a bottle of rum sort of thing. Here's the opening. Right? It's the sea. And when the Mikado, of course, the Mikado is a pentatonic tune, which is an actual Japanese tune that he borrowed. But the one that I really think sort of shows off his gifts as a setter of atmosphere is Rudy Gore. Because Rudy Gore is a horror story. It's a comic horror story. And that's also part of Sullivan's gift. You have, the comic Asian thing. You've got the comic pirate thing. You get the comic horror thing. And the first couple of minutes of Rudy Gore are this wonderful little bit of brooding horror movie music that is just beautifully poised on that edge between being sort of turbulent and dramatic and scary and not serious at all. And that is exactly what a great comic composer has to do. Walk that edge between seriousness and a joke. And you never know which way the music's going to go. Here, listen to the opening of the overture to Rudy Gore. heard that in isolation, would you ever say, oh, that's Sullivan? I don't think you would. I think you would say, that's interesting. Now remember, Sullivan didn't write most of his own overtures. He had, what was his name, Alfred Cellier or whatever his name was. He had one of his assistants cobble them together from the overtures. He did write a few of them. But that's not the point, because the tunes are his, and the scoring is largely his, and it's just wonderfully atmospheric music. And that's the ability of a comic composer. You've got to be able to turn on a dime. You need to be able to switch from happiness to sadness, from light to dark, from loud to soft in an instant, all while preserving the long line. And then there are the melodies. I mean, Sullivan was one of the great melodists in the history of music. An incredible. Listen to that amazing solo from the Mikado, The Sun Whose Rays. Just listen to this melody. It's as great a melody as anybody ever wrote. Here it is. And it's not just the slow tunes. The Wedding Bells chorus from Pinafore, or I mean, all of Iolanthe, which is, Mendelssohn's A Midsummer Night's Dream on steroids, basically. It's fabulous. Iolanthe, the Piers and the Peri. It also has one of the all-time best entrances in all of opera. You've got the entrance of the members of Parliament, the peers, the House of Lords, where they all come in and their refrain is, "Bow, bow, ye lower middle classes, bow, bow, ye tradesmen, bow, ye masses, blow the trumpets, bang the brasses, tantarantara, chin boom." Then they come in, "We are peers of highest station, pillars of the British nation, paragons of legislation." I mean, it just goes on and on. and perfect settings of words and music. And if that isn't worth something, then no kind of music has value, frankly. There is just the classical music world is just so full of people with sticks up their ass. I mean, that's all I can say about it. It's so depressing. It kills me. It really does. Why don't we value joy, funniness, comedy? Now, I understand, again, a lot of comedy is local and it doesn't translate all that well. But when something is done as well as it can be done, as Sullivan demonstrably does in these works, over and over and over and over, more than a dozen times, how can anybody deny him the accolades that I think he's entitled to receive? I don't. And so that's my 10 cents worth. That's my feeling about it. I can't stress enough how important it is that we divest ourselves of this Wagnerian, Victorian, romantic elevation of the dismal. I have no patience for it. I really, really don't. I think it's sad, and that doesn't mean there isn't great music that's sad or that's tragic. There is, but it's not better, and that's the point I want to make. And I hope that this gives you something to think about, and more to the point, that you go and listen to your Sullivan, because you can't do better. It's that simple, and certainly the English school never did. So there. Keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.